It's the weekend. It looks like it's going to be a really nice weekend, so I'll try and get a lot done on the car. I also want to do a catalogue of parts I need for the Valacet and do some gardening stuff. But today I want to get the metal strips made for the bottoms of the doors and start fitting the door locks if I can. So during the week I've done one so far. I got a bit held up because I need screws to screw those to the timber, and I wanted to get the right sort of screws, it's actually quite difficult to find countersunk stainless steel wood screws these days. So I got the ones that I've used for the timber frame, but they don't do sort of shorter ones that I need for those bits of metal. So I got some stainless steel. They're actually chipboard screws, but apparently they'll be okay for timber. And of course they're square drive, but I also got some zinc plated ones. I think either of these should be fine to use. These are timber screws. Of course I need the countersunk head, because what I'm going to do is I'll countersink the timber, and I will countersink, or rather I will I'll make a little former type thing, and I will dimple the steel plates or the sheet metal so that the screw heads are flush. That's basically how I'm going to do it, so that I can then put the door skin over the top of those. So that's something I need to do today. And I've mentioned before getting solid rivets. That's turned into one of those things where it's just a complete pain in the neck for me to get them. So you can't just easily go and buy them. I'm sure there are places that supply them, but you look at their websites, they're not just go on the website, click and order. It's, you'd have to ring them and find out what they've got, and they probably sell them in batches of 1,000, that kind of thing. I can obviously get them from overseas, but I don't want to have to do that every time and then pay for postage and then wait a month for things to turn up. There is a kit you can get from Eastwood, a solid riveting kit, which actually comes with Cleco pliers and bits and pieces. But that's 500 New Zealand dollars, and I don't need like a pound of rivets. I don't need that many solid rivets. So in the end, I've decided I'm just going to use these, and they are pop rivets, so completely out of period, but I'm using the sealed kind. So the back of them is sealed up. They're actually meant for things, they're meant to be waterproof. These I can get pretty easily here. And what I've done is I've used them where the heads can't be seen. So you can't see the heads of the pop rivet, which obviously makes it a pop rivet. It's very easy to spot and it'll look wrong. And the back of them doesn't look too bad. It's not the same as a solid rivet, but it's not the same as an open pop rivet. So that's what I've used. And if somebody wants to complain when they're in the car looking down into the footwell that those 3 rivets on either side aren't correct, then fine, they can do that. If I ever come across a decent source of proper ones, I can always replace them later. I don't think I ever will. So the interesting thing will be the rest of the sort of firewall. Some bits need to be bolted on, and some bits will be riveted, and some of the support material will be riveted. And I think if I use those same rivets, I'll do the same trick. I'll make it so that the very obvious modern head end of the rivet is the bit that's hidden. So for example, this piece that will go along there, actually that piece needs to be bolted on, because obviously if I rivet that one on, you need to be able to get it off to get this over the steering column. So I'll try and use bolts wherever possible, and the bits that need to be riveted will probably be sort of hidden like those are, because I think what I'm going to have is similar angle on the sides here. I might actually need to make that like I did down here, because that needs to be bent at an angle for this angle of the firewall. There's various ways to do it. I do want to leave the panels that go on the side here, I want to be able to be bolted in place. I don't want this solid, because it'll just make it easier when the bonnet's open to get access to all this area if you need to. And it's quite handy to be able to do that, to get, I don't know, if you want to get into the clutch or the starter or anything like that without having to pull everything apart. So I think those will be all right for now, and they're going to be barely noticeable. So I think now I'll go on to the metal strip for the doors. Just another little rant on the cost of things. This is the paint I typically use for all my little bits of steel bracketry, and this is actually what all the running gear has been painted in, the springs, anything like that. I find this paint is really good. It's engine enamel, and it goes on pretty mucky metal. Obviously the cleaner you can get it, the better, but it's nice and easy. It's quite thin, so you don't get a massive buildup of paint, and it's quite robust, and it's fairly fuel and oil proof because it's engine enamel. But this may soon be difficult to get, so I bought 2 cans of this yesterday. They were $33 each, which is ridiculous. And I sort of mentioned to the guy, this was from Super Cheap Auto, and he said, yeah, they're actually going to stop getting this because it's just got too expensive, and they don't want to pay that much for it anymore themselves, so they're not going to be supplying it anymore, which means I might need to stock up on this stuff or figure out somewhere else to get it from. And of course the problem is it's spray paint, so a lot of places won't ship it, so you can't just go and order it online because they won't courier it to you. So just little bits and pieces are just getting more and more difficult to do. I do use a different sort of paint. The other paint I use, and this is what I'm going to paint the wheels on the little bike, is this Kill Rust paint. And this is what I'm probably going to do the chassis in, because again, this is an anti-rust. This stuff is very thick. It gives a really nice thick coat. It dries really well. It's what I did the chassis on the Austin 7 with, and that came up fine, and that's held up really well. It's also fairly fuel proof, I believe. Once it's dry, it takes, I think it's a proper enamel, so it takes a week or more to dry. But when it does, it's very good. That's what I've painted the outside of the petrol tank for the motorbike in, and it's a gloss paint. Comes up quite well. Even though it's a gloss, I think on the chassis, because the chassis rails on this are all open, it'll dull down eventually. I don't think we can see any of it on the Austin to see what it looks like. No, I'd have to get underneath there or get the bonnet open. So that's kind of the plan. That paint will kind of effectively match what the wheels are. And the good thing about using that is, one, I can buy that paint in tins and you can spray it, so I can spray it myself. And two, because it comes in spray cans, it's really easy to touch things up if you need to. So I think that's the plan. How I'm going to paint the body, I haven't decided on that just yet, or what sort of paint to use, because I want a particular look. I don't want it looking like modern paint. So I'm not sure the best way to achieve that yet, what I'm going to do. And I don't want paint I have to look after, because I'm lazy. Same with the Land Rover, same with the MG. I don't want to have to be cutting and polishing the paint and waxing it and all that kind of stuff. I know you're supposed to, so it lasts better, but I'd rather just drive the car, and if it looks old and grimy, then it's an old car. So I'm not going for a show car. Especially something like this, where just the nature of the car means you're going to scratch the paint. I don't think there's any way to avoid it as you jump in and out of the car. I've already realised, for example, getting in and out of here, all of this is going to get dinged up pretty quickly. So I don't want a car that I'm going to worry about scratching the paint on. I just want a car I can jump in and drive. So I don't want to overthink it too much. This is the engine bay of the Austin 7. I thought I would just show what that paint ends up looking like. The radiator will have been done in that low gloss engine enamel. That's the stuff. But things like the firewall and all of the chassis rails and all of the solid bits have been done in that kill rust paint. So you can sort of see the difference. And this is what I mean about the paint getting scratched and dinged and not wanting to have to worry about it. This also shows this idea, it's a bit dark so it's hard to see, of having the opening in the side of the firewall, and that was something that Joss taught me. He'd obviously learned that one by experience, so that's why there's a cutout here, because it means you can get access into here, which is quite useful because there's things in there like the speedo drive and bits and pieces. And of course when the bonnet's closed, it doesn't matter that there's a big hole there. So I don't know if I'll leave the hole there on the Riley. I'll have a panel that covers it off, but it'll be a removable panel. So that kind of gives an idea. I can't remember what paint I used. I think this is just the engine enamel on the exhaust as well, because of course it'll support a fairly high temperature, and it kind of bakes itself on. But you can see, maybe, because it's an Austin 7, it's self-oiling. So once the chassis gets a bit of oil and dirt and stuff on it, it dulls down quite nicely. It doesn't stay hugely glossy, which is what I want. I don't want it hugely glossy. This is another small distraction. I should be working on the car. This is working on the car. And I should have filmed this before I took it apart, but I just got off Trade Me a little Smith's clock, which I should have filmed before I took it apart, but it was pretty grubby, and of course the seller said they didn't know if it worked or not, but it's a wind-up clock, so obviously it wasn't working. If it was running fine, they would have said. So I took a chance on it, figuring it was just old. So I've taken it all apart, which is pretty easy. I just really gently clean the face, just with effectively soapy water, just a little bit of water just to get the dust and stuff off. And then what I've found works well for me is, same on other gauges, is putting a thin coat of this electrical clean and lube on it, because it'll stop it rusting, and it's not a solvent, so it doesn't affect the printing on it, because that's pretty delicate. If you use anything else, it can take that off. It'll just strip it off. So I always test it a little bit. Haven't done anything with the hands, just clean them up. I took the face and the hands off, and I actually put it through the ultrasonic cleaner in some like a light ammonia solution, and that got most of the grime and stuff off it. I also find you can use lighter fluid, which is naphthalene. That works really well. I use that for cleaning old cameras as well, and it just dissolves all the grease, and it evaporates really quickly, so it doesn't leave a mess. But when I first got it, it would tick for a little bit and then stop. I think it's fully wound. Now that I've cleaned it, it'll actually run a bit longer, but then it'll stop again. So I've stripped it all down and taken it apart, cleaned it out as best I can. Like I say, it's been through the ultrasonic, it's had the naphthalene, and then I sort of dried it off with compressed air. Yeah, just started again. So I think it's clean now. I suspect it just now needs lubricating, because of course I will have flushed any oil and grease and stuff out of it. It was pretty manky inside. So I don't have the proper clock or watch oil, so I need to order some of that, of course, which means another delay while I wait for that stuff to arrive. It's like $30 for a little 2ml bottle. I suspect that 2ml bottle will last forever, plus another $10 for shipping, of course, postage. But I believe if you look at it, you can see where the little pillar, the little bearing surfaces are. I don't think it's got jewels in it or anything, but you can usually sort of see a couple of them have little dishes around the pins, and I think that's where you put the little drops of oil, or a drop of oil. So I took it off the base with the winding mechanism, so that you can get to both sides, and you can see there the places you need to oil. It's definitely running a lot better than it was. It would only run for a few seconds and then just stop. So I suspect once this has got some proper clock or watch oil on it, that should run well. I have no reason to see why it won't. And this style clock is, I think it's a better fit for my car. The other one I've got is a sort of 20s, like an earlier 20s Smith's wind up clock, where it's sort of it's in a case, and you open the case to wind the clock and then you close it again. This just has the little winding shaft sticking down the bottom. It stopped again. And I think it's just more in period and more the right sort of style. It might be a little bit late period wise for a 1930, but it's pretty close. And I think it looks better than the other one. It matches the other gauges. So I'm going to order that clock oil now. Hopefully it doesn't take too long to turn up. Yeah, hopefully that fixes it. I'm pretty sure it will. Taken my hands off my clock, and I am fitting the strip to the bottom of the door. Just as I was about to do this, I've realized I missed a step, which means I'm going to have to put the door back on the car. I need to make sure that this gap at the back of the door is even to the gap to the frame at the back of the body. The other thing I've done is actually bolted the frame back down. It was just sitting there with the bolts loosely in place. Of course, I want everything to be bolted into the position it should be on the car to make sure all the gaps are correct. So the frame's bolted down again. I've actually made up little blocks that I planed these to be the right gaps that I need. So I need the gap at the back of the door to be correct for the latch and the little double catch mechanism. So before I actually do what I was going to do, I need to put the door back on and plane this back face to get that much gap between it and the frame, basically. But what I'm doing is I've made the strip that goes along the bottom of the door, and I'd previously made the strip that goes along here. This is when I realized I hadn't made that adjustment on the back there. And these will be welded together. I've done some experiments with these little countersunk wood screws. These ones I found I can't use. The angle on the back here is different, and these are kind of designed to cut into the timber, so these won't work on the metal here. But this was just my experiment with how I'm going to dimple the steel so that the head of the screw will hold it down, but it all sits flush. And what I'm using is my little countersinking bit. This thing's great. This is a Makita one. I need to get some more of these. They hold up really well, and they do a really nice job on metal as well as timber. So the idea is I've marked the holes. I found I didn't need anywhere near as many screws as I figured I would. A few screws in there is going to be more than enough to hold that in place. I drilled the holes, measured and drilled, and I'm using it as a template to drill the pilot holes in the timber frame. It was doing that that made me realize I'd forgotten to do that back, and I'd also already dimpled one of the holes. And the way that works is, let me see if I've got it set up. I'm using my little bench press thing, and I made a little block with the right countersink in it, and that hole is so that the screw can fit through. And then all I'm doing is, might be tricky with one hand, screw goes into the hole, that goes in there like that. I put another piece over the top and squash it down, and that gives me a nice little dimple in the sheet metal so that the screw head will be below the surface. These little blocks are just so that it doesn't fully distort the metal, and it needs to be small enough to allow for the curve in these as well. It gets a bit tricky, so I need the curve there to get them to sit flat on the door, but having the curve makes it a little bit harder to drill and press these flat. But that's how that should work. You can see I actually did the first one before I clamped this on and marked the holes, but that's how that came out. It'll be much easier to see when the screw's in there, but it's given me a nice little dimple without distorting the metal around it. Screw head will sit flush. So I'm going to dimple the rest of these, but I won't screw these to the frame until I've done the back. I've done this piece, and I'm going to scribe this, and I will probably TIG weld this together. So this will be one piece, and then once I've done that, I can work on the door locks, and then eventually I'm going to have to paint all of the steel, or at least prime all of the steel, treat and stain the door skin before I can actually screw these on. That'll be the idea, and I may painting it should be enough, I think, for rust proofing of all of this kind of stuff. This would have been a problem if I had made the skin out of aluminium, because you need this flange around the bottom and the rear edge of the door. If I was using aluminium for the skin, you would have steel with aluminium wrapped around it, and that's likely to give you corrosion problems sometime in the future because it's quite hard to seal between the dissimilar metals. So especially on an edge like that, I think even if you paint it, by the time you've folded that door skin around, you're going to crack the paint, and it's likely to cause problems later on. It hopefully isn't so much of a problem with steel on steel, but eventually, obviously, that's where they rust out, because that's what's happened on that original door skin. I would say what's happened here is you've got the door skin up against that steel flange, and between the two, moisture's got in, and that's why it's rusted all on that bottom edge. So I will put, before I put the skin on, I will try and put something in there to create a bit of a barrier. I'm not sure what the best thing to use is. It's like paint or grease or some sort of tape, not really sure. Realistically, it's never going to be a problem in my lifetime, so even if I don't do anything, it's not going to be a big deal. But I'll dimple the rest of those and show what that looks like. So that's it set up in the little press, ready to go. And it's just kind of a matter of pressing it down. And that gives me a nice flush screw head. And then that countersink on the back, because this hole has been made with the same countersink bit, when I countersink the timber, they should fit nicely into place. So that's all dimpled, which is strangely satisfying. I don't know why, but it's quite fun doing that. And I countersunk the timber behind it, and you can see with that clamped in place how it sits flat against the timber, or it will when it's screwed down. All the screw heads will be flush. I should point out that I have no idea how they did this at the factory. I've never seen the inside of a door. Even if you could see a real car, it would be quite hard to tell how they actually did this. But this is my best guess at what's going on here, and I'm pretty sure this will work. The other reason I didn't need quite so many screws, of course, is you're going to have a steel skin over this. This just really provides the lip that the bottom of it wraps around. It would take a lot for this to be pulled out. I've put 3 screws in the back because that piece is what, when you close the door, this lip here is what hits up against the body. I do actually have little rubber buffer things, and I may look at, maybe I can use those. It's little sort of, not triangular, but kind of little ramp shaped type things, so that when the door closes, it sort of slides it into the right position. So maybe something like that would be good, but I think that's going to work. So now I need to put this back on the car to get that gap correct at the back. And this just shows what I mean by this door gap at the back of the door. You can see it's not even, so just fit that in there, but on this edge it's 3/16 maybe needs to come off. So I need to probably get out the belt sander is the easiest way. I'm not sure if I can use the plane on that. Either that, or actually maybe what I can do is just mark around it, take the door off again and put it on the linishing machine. I think that might be the best way. I find using that means, because it's got a flat back to it, you can keep that face very flat while you're sanding it. Yes, I think that's probably the best way to do it. Because I don't have the latches in place, you can actually close the door slightly further in than it would normally go, which is perfect because it means I can use my gauge like this, and with a pencil just mark that line. So that just shows me I need to sand off this corner basically, and then that should be a nice gap. The other side isn't too bad, I think. Yeah, it's quite a lot closer, but it's a lot more even. A lot more even than the other side. It's quite interesting that there's so much shape in these doors. There's not really a flat surface on them because of the barrel shape of the car. So this is the back of the door now, sanded to be more or less even. I'm very pleased that when I did the hinge side of things, I kept all the tolerances tight, which means I only need two nuts done up to hold the door in the right place. I don't have to do up all 6 bolts, which would take forever. As it is, I think I've taken this on and off 4 or 5 times just to get this gap right. So it's a long process trying to get it exact, or trying to get it good. You have to put pieces on and off the car all the time. It just takes forever, and it's one of the things I think you miss a lot if you watch a lot of YouTube car building videos. Most of them skip 90% of the detail, and that's one of the reasons I don't bother filming everything, because it would be so boring. Just hours of taking doors on and off, for example, or hours of sanding, just trying to get everything exactly right. But that's looking pretty good now. Gap all looks nice and even. This lines up on the top. There's sort of combing that goes over all of this anyway. Speaking of taking things on and off, you can see I had to remove that timber piece because when I bolted the chassis on, there isn't quite enough clearance between that middle bolt and the top of that front support. So I had to notch that out and then of course restain it where I'd cut out the timber. But this door now looks correct, which means I can clamp the bottom piece in place and get the back piece drilled and in place, and then I can mark where those two cross, trim it, weld it so that steel edge is one piece, and then that would be ready to put on the door after all the staining and the painting and all the other bits and pieces. So that's kind of where we're at. Of course, once I've done this side, I have to do everything again on the passenger side. I have welded up the corner, and I discovered in order to mark it accurately, I did actually have to screw it all the way down to get it to sit properly. The other thing I discovered is I do actually have some stainless steel slotted screws, which I'll use when I finally assemble it. I just prefer the slotted screws. Not that anyone's going to see the slotted heads, of course, when the door skin's over the top of all of this, but I just like those stainless screws better. They just seem stronger. These ones, they're just cheap and nasty, and they just feel like they're going to shear off. So I'm being quite careful with them. But the screws are a little bit bigger, so I just repress the dimples. I just had to drill a slightly bigger hole through the middle of the bottom piece of that little steel block, just to fit the slightly fatter shaft of the screws. But because those screws are slightly bigger, it means I can screw these down, and then when I do the final assembly, there's still plenty of wood to bite into. So it's come out quite nice. Because I hadn't screwed it down when I marked it, I did need to use a little bit of filler in this corner, so I haven't been able to get a sort of Kyle level invisible weld there, but it's not too bad and it's flat. It's all ground flat. So I'll put the door back on the car for about the 6 millionth time and see how it looks on there. This is how it looks on the car. I was thinking I might need to tap this corner down a little bit, but I've just realized it might need to stay out there, because when the skin wraps around, if I tap that in, it's going to hit the frame there. So that corner of the door is in just a little bit, but that'll be okay. It doesn't have to follow that exactly, because the shape of the skin will affect that. So the skin will wrap around here, so that may actually need to come out a little bit further. And you can see at the back now how the door will close like that, and I think I've got it fairly close. Obviously there'll be another layer of metal here that it'll sit on, so it'll sit out like that a little bit, and of course once the skin is on there, you can adjust that a little bit. I mean, that's not too far out. I'm pretty happy with how that's come out. I need to just trim that top edge, but yeah, and it kind of shows, I think I mentioned it last time, how the body's curved, but the chassis rail's actually flat there. So there's a little bit of a weird thing going on there. I think the original cars, a lot of them, there's actually a sort of metal cover that goes over a lot of this, but you see a lot of cars without that. I'm not sure on these pictures if you can see it. I think this one, you can see there's actually another piece of metal screwed to the side there. So I think that's looking pretty good. Let's see, here's my little 5/16 spacer. Should fit in there. Oops, point the camera in the right direction. So that gives me the clearance for the lock mechanism. Yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. I've finished the metal strip on the passenger door. That one didn't take anywhere near as long, of course. That was only about an hour. And I did it a little differently. I welded the two pieces together. I drilled the holes for the bottom lot and then welded in the vertical piece before I drilled and dimpled the holes in it. So it meant I didn't have a gap when I welded it. I got a much nicer weld. The only thing I need to do on that one is, of course, welding it, and then I planished the welds. So I lost a little bit of the curve in there. I just need to recurve this bottom just to get that touching all the way around. But that should work pretty well. They kind of feel more like real doors now that they effectively close. They close in position, so that's how they're supposed to be. But I think the fit of that's pretty good. Like I say, I'll just do that, curve that little bit on the bottom. I need to trim the tops of them, and I think what I'll do tonight is take them off again. I think I can unscrew them without taking the doors off the hinges, and I'll give them a good scuff up, reshape them, trim the tops, give them a good sand, and I'll give them a coat of primer or zinc primer, something like that, just something so that they're not going to flash rust on me. And then I'll give them a proper paint. I'll probably use that black kill rust paint, nice good thick solid paint. That'll all get covered up anyway, but it is a proper anti-rust type paint. But yeah, they look really good. I'm very much looking forward to having the latches in place and actually having doors that properly work like doors, so click shut and stay shut. And what I'm hoping is, with the way that I'm going to do it, I can adjust the shims underneath the lock to get it to sit exactly right. Like I say, I think I've mentioned before, I don't know if they used any kind of rubber seals or anything around the edges of the doors. I don't think so. I think it was just the door was probably positioned so it wasn't rubbing too much. Because you have to remember, this is very flexible, so there's going to be movement between the back here and the front of the door, I'm sure, as the car twists and moves around. I'm being attacked by birds. That was very strange. It's another excellent day. I think the weather's going to turn bad tomorrow, but I'll make the most of today. Another small distraction. This is one of the victims of the power outage we had a few weeks ago. This was our range hood, which also blew up. So I've pulled that apart because I'm hoping the motor is still good, and I suspect it will be. I think the motor will be fine. Of course, being an old range hood, it's covered in grease and fat, and I'm just kind of cleaning it with some household cleaner. I've just got it out here soaking in it. So I'm going to give that a clean up, and the rest of it sort of in here. More junk taking up space. That's various bits of it. Those are a couple of the outdoor lights that blew up. This was the controller for the range hood. This capacitor is completely exploded. Same with this chip here. Probably can't really see, but the whole top of that chip's been blown off, and the mains input side of things, this is all blown up as well. So this bit's completely dead, but as far as I can tell, it's just a simple AC motor with low, medium and high windings. There's a capacitor that goes with it. So if the motor still works, I should be able to rewire that up just with some sort of switch, 3-position switch, or 4 positions, so you've got off, and use that as kind of an extractor fan in the shed. That's the idea anyway. At some point, I've mentioned I'm going to have to paint things, and what I'm thinking of doing is we bought one of those cheap gazebos, the plastic ones, and what I will do when I want to do the painting is I'll set that up inside the shed as a sort of spray booth, mainly to stop overspray going on everything and stop dust getting on the paint. But it's a good idea to have some sort of airflow through that, so maybe I can use this little fan as an extractor. When I painted the chassis of the Austin 7, I did the same way long time ago in my old shed in my old house in Auckland. And setting up a plastic spray booth like that actually worked pretty well. And I just used a little heater fan just on the cold air setting as a blower, and that gave me enough airflow. So I think the range hood motor should do reasonably well. But now I need to clean up the mess. I'll leave that soaking for a bit. I will try and get the door latches in place. I did etch prime the steel strips that go along the bottom, but I need those in place when I'm setting up the latch on the door. Also, this shows, now that it's all sanded nicely, it shows the extra bit of timber I had to add in along here to get the shape right. And I don't think the door had warped. I think it was just that I had the wrong shape. You can see about a 1/4 inch I had to put on there to get that to sit nicely. I think if I was doing this again, I wouldn't do the final shaping on the doors until I was more at this stage. I would actually leave them fat, get them all set up on the hinges and everything, and then trim them to suit the body, because now they're in the absolute correct position, hanging how they should be, and it would make more sense to shape them then. Although I wasn't too far off with the other door. The other door fits fine. So things you learn after you've done it the first time, and then hopefully never have to do it again. I have the back half of the frame off the chassis so that I can make the little cutouts for the door strikers. And as per my little wooden model, I've set these into the back of the door so that when the back of the door is there with the correct gap, it gives me the right sort of overlap so that the latch works correctly, if that makes sense. So I just had to kind of notch it out a little bit so that the gap between the door and the frame is as small as it can be. When I do the skinning, of course, that'll just wrap over there a little bit. And I'm using my 5/16 spacers to make sure that gap is the same. And one thing I had to consider is, of course, the body's curved, but you want these vertical. I'm going to have to do the same on the door, because of course the door is on an angle like that, and the outside of the door is on the angle, but the door, it's not moving in that direction, it's moving in that direction. So I think for these to work properly, I'll need to offset the latches in the door a little bit as well. Because if I just mount them flat on the door, then the striker isn't hitting the plate at the right angle. So you need these to hit at the same angle. I think there is a little bit of movement in there. They're slightly rounded. But what I'll do is I'll finish notching out the other side, which is over there, and then put it back on the car, and then I'll have to figure out what the angle is on the inside of the doors when I do that part. And the way I've done this notch is just hammer and chisel, and then my Shinto file and some sandpaper just to smooth it off in there. What I ended up doing was I measured the midpoint of the door frame. I've put these right in the middle, and I drew the line across. So that's how I'm making sure these strikers are parallel to each other. So I used a piece of angle across to transfer the lines all the way across the car. You can see there's quite a bit of angle here. The sides of the car definitely don't go straight up and down. So I will do this side. What I've actually done, it's a bit hard to see, I used my little Japanese saw to cut the verticals, and then I can chisel down to that and chisel out the middle without any danger of splitting off the edges. I was really hoping that this weekend I would get to the point where I had doors on the car that would actually click closed. So proper functioning doors. Unfortunately, I'm not quite there because I had forgotten yesterday that I needed to set in an extra piece of wood because I need to bolt the latch mechanism to it. So this needed to be wider. And I've put those pieces in there now, and I've used epoxy to put those in there. This is fast setting epoxy. It's effectively 1 hour epoxy, and it is dry after that time, but I find it doesn't really go properly solid for 24 hours. So if I try to sand this now, it'll still be a little bit rubbery and it'll just make a mess. So I'm going to leave it for another day, and then tomorrow night I can sand those. You can see on the back here I have marked a center line, or a vertical line rather. It's a bit hard to imagine, but that line there is vertical, and I measured how much I can set in the door locks. So 1/2 inch here, maybe a little bit less, in like that, and that will set those locks so that the latch is the latch and the striker are on the same plane, basically. So as the door moves that way to close, it'll hit square on. I think that's the best way to do it. So that'll be notched out. Same way I did it on the frame. I'll just vertical saw cut straight down, chisel out most of it, and then file the rest. And then I can put the doors on for about the 600th time, and hopefully they work. The next thing then will be figuring out the actual mechanism to operate the locks. I have had a quick look for 1/4 inch steel stock, hex steel stock like this to make some of the linkage out of, but seems hard to find. So I've got a mill. I'll just make my own because I only need the end of it to be hex, and it just fits into there. And I'm still waiting for the door handles to come from the UK. Again, waiting for parts. But the idea will be this gets set into there at the correct angle. I will kind of notch out here so that the little lever, effectively what I'm going to do is make a plate, a little flat plate that goes in there with the appropriate hex on this side, and probably just a washer and a circlip on here to hold it in there. And then that little arm will come out to here, and there'll be a linkage that goes up to about here somewhere. And this is where the door handle will be, up here. So I'll make a little steel bracket that can screw to the inside of the frame here, a little angle bracket, and that will have a similar hex, because I'm pretty sure the door handles have a hex on them. They've either got a hex or a square. And then there will just be a linkage that goes. So this will probably come down like this. I think it's about 30 degrees to get full opening on this. And that keeps the door mechanism all nicely out of the way. It's fairly deeply set in, so it should almost be flush. So if I have a trim card on here, I may need a little tiny bubble just over that piece, just to cover it. But that's where we got to. And I ended up having to repaint a couple of my brackets because the paint was scratching off, because I'd used, this was galvanized steel, and the paint doesn't stick to the galvanizing. So I stripped the paint off, stripped the zinc off with some hydrochloric acid solution, which also gives it a nice key for the paint, and then just repainted it. So this is where the doors are at, and I think that's where I have to finish for the weekend. I'm just wondering if I should wait and get the doors finished and put all this up as one long film, or do that in a separate one.